Thank you, Amy, very much. I'm grateful to Thomas More College and the Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture for having me here to talk about this novel and to share my excitement, because I am excited about the novel. So I thank you all for coming as well to share in that excitement. I have written and published a dozen books, and I can honestly say I'm more excited about this one than about the previous ones. And I ask myself why. Because when I first started writing a novel, I thought, well, why not? It'd be fun. Some of the other books I sort of hoped would change the world. They haven't, I'm afraid. At least not noticeably. But this is my first novel. It's likely to be like my last. All the others have been nonfiction, and there's a very big difference. It's much more personal writing fiction. I feel much more exposed and much more nervous and much more excited. As one friend said to me as I was trying to explain this, he said, "You've got to show a little leg, haven't you?" And I said, yes. I mean, I'm vulnerable. When I write something in nonfiction, you may or may not agree with my argument. And I write it for the purpose of arguing. I love arguing. So I'm ready to argue with you. But I'm confident in my facts. I'm a journalist. I get my facts. So I'm confident in that much. Now, writing a novel, I have no reason to be confident, frankly. Can I make a character that's plausible? Can I make a plot? I don't know. I'm finding out right around now. So I'm nervous, and I feel, coming back to Thomas More College, I saw students delivering their theses. I relate to them a little bit now. Anyway, I'm glad you're here to share in the excitement. The nervousness is optional, whether you want to share in that or not. I'm here tonight. I want to say three things, and I'll be fairly brief. My wife Lila always tells me, tell all the stories. So if I go too long, it's her fault. She's a ridiculous. I want to say three things. First, what kind of book it is. Second, why I wrote it. And third, how it came to pass that it's now in print, which is actually a bit of a trick because it's hard to get fiction in print these days. First, what kind of book it is? Well, if you look on Amazon, you see it is rated about 10,000th in the sales of suspense thrillers, which is kind of interesting for two reasons. First, it's not available yet on Amazon. I don't know why, but it's been out for a month, but Amazon is not delivering it. Nor will they deliver before Christmas. So if you want it, get it from the publisher. If you want it as a Christmas present. And what else would you want as a Christmas present? Second, it's not a suspense thriller. So if there are only 12,000 better suspense thrillers, it kind of makes me wonder how many better books are there about 14th century French literature? It's not a suspense thriller, but I can sort of understand why Amazon might have given that impression if you read the cover stuff. Phil Lawler, one of America's most respected Catholic writers and cultural critics, here bursts onto the fiction scene with a riveting debut novel that plunges readers into the hidden battles of the church. I'm looking for an albino monk. It's not that kind of book. I'm sorry if you came here thinking it really isn't about ghosts. I think the person who wrote the cover copy had spent a lot of time at the espresso machine before he wrote it. But to be honest, to be fair to him, I don't mean to be critical if he's here tonight, it's a hard book for me to categorize. It's a little hard to place, because it's a little hard to place me. We're here today on the birthday of Jane Austen, are we not? And I'm not Jane Austen. You probably knew that. I don't think this book will supplant Anna Karenina as great literature. I don't think it will supplant Harry Potter as a bestseller. I don't think it's a great book, in the sense that I don't think it will be on the curriculum at Thomas More College. I'll be happy if it's a good book, because good books are a good thing. And I will be very happy if it is compared with something like J.F. Powers or Edwin O'Connor. A couple of weeks ago, I gave a talk about as much as what I'm doing tonight at the Trivium School in Lancaster, Massachusetts. And I said I would be very happy if it were compared with Edwin O'Connor, and I think it was within the next day or two, I saw something on social media from a priest who I know somewhat, who said he compared this novel with The Edge of Sadness, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Edwin O'Connor, and he made my day. But I have to tell you that he has been supplanted. I told you it's not available, the hard copy is not available on Amazon yet, but the Kindle is. And as of this morning, there was one Kindle review. And that review, the headline was, "It's plausible and well-researched, but more Tom Wolfe than Dostoevsky." So, I'm not as good as Dostoevsky. I can live with that. If I'm as good as Tom Wolfe, I can live with that too. And he goes on to say, this reviewer, he compares it with Emile Zola's Catholic novels, and he says, Ghost Runner is better than Zola's Catholic novels. Well, I don't know Zola's Catholic novels, but I feel like I'm in good company there. It is a Catholic novel in this sense. It's written in a world that will be familiar to Catholics, somewhat unfamiliar to others. It's not meant to be exclusive to others. It's not theological, except maybe in a very vague sense. But if you are a Catholic, you grew up in a Catholic church, you grew up in a Catholic background, you'll understand better. It will also be more familiar to you if you're from Boston, because it's set in Boston, a little bit in D.C., Washington, D.C. It's set in the 1980s. It is not a Romanesque. That is, it is not thinly disguised my account of what it was like to grow up in Boston in the 1980s, or I guess I shouldn't say that. In a way, it is about what it was like to be in Boston in the 1980s, but it's not historical. The characters, if you're looking for it, if you're reading, looking to match the characters in a novel with characters in real life, you will fail, because they're not there. Don't look for that kind of key, you won't find it. Partly because I really don't like that kind of novel. I have the soul of a journalist. If I know it, I'll write it. If I don't know it and I can't prove it, I won't write it. I don't like teasing. So it's set in the Archdiocese of Boston, involves characters in the Archdiocese of Boston. In the 1980s, I was working in the Archdiocese of Boston as editor of the newspaper. There is an Archbishop of Boston in the book. If you're tempted to think it's cardinal law, you would be very wrong. And anyone who knows anything about cardinal law will tell you that. One of the characters in the book is the Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America. As it happens, I was friendly with the man who was Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America in that period of time. He's not the man in the book at all. And if you know him, you know it doesn't fit. The funny thing is, as I prepared this talk, I realized the last time I had seen this man, Assistant Secretary of State, Elliot Abrams, for Latin America, it was in Cardinal Law's office. So, if you want to get into conspiracy theories and deep dive into what this book is about, you could do that, and you would be wrong. It's set against a historical background, however, so that some of the people, institutions, and events that come up in the book are real life. My favorite restaurant in Washington, of the 80s plays, although it doesn't play a part, restaurants don't play parts. But the items on the menu in that chapter were on the menu and they were delicious. And I'm really sad to say the restaurant is closed. I appear on a cameo, walk on a roll. I figure if Alfred Hitchcock can do that in his movies, why can't I? I don't name myself, but it's obvious if you know. So that's what kind of book it is. Why did I write it? Well, I wrote it partly because I've spent 40 years as a Catholic journalist, a bit more than that actually. And I feel like as though recently I've been saying the same thing over and over again, trying to find different ways to say it. Trying to say something about the state of the Catholic Church and grasping for a new way to get the point across to people who might not have understood me yet. And I thought, I need to try a different approach. And in the foreword to this book, I try to express that sometimes I believe fiction can be truer than nonfiction, in this sense, that there are a lot of things I know, I'm morally certain are true, but I don't feel comfortable saying in print because I can't prove it, I can't demonstrate it to my own satisfaction, and yet I know it. And usually these are things that I have sort of figured out. The scenarios that the only way I can make sense of a scenario that's before me, I can't prove it, but I can't make sense of it any other way. Or I has inside information, something like that. Anyway, I can't say it. But if I put a fictional character in a situation, well, let me go back just a bit. I can't say it because I can't tell why someone did something. I can speculate. I can be pretty sure my speculation is right, but I don't know it. But a fictional character, I can make him think what I think he thinks. And that is what he thinks, because he's fictional. The only reason he thinks anything is I put the ideas in his head. And so I thought that if I could do a fictional treatment of the problems that I see in the church, maybe I could make it more evident what it is I'm trying to get at. Because what I've been trying to get at for the past 40 years is that the problems of our Catholic Church are problems. It's a crisis of faith. It's people who don't know how to live the beliefs that they profess because the beliefs are not sufficiently immediate to them. I've thought this for years because much of my work in these 40 years has been covering scandals, unfortunately, because that's a lot of what has been happening in the church in these years. And in these scandals, I've asked myself, how can it be that people who are good people, who seem like good people, who live good lives, who are prayerful, a lot of these people I knew personally did horrible, horrible things. I'm thinking of bishops who protected predators. And again, I knew a lot of them, and I knew them as good men, as prayerful men, as honest. And I say, how can they do this? How can they think that they are serving the church? Because I honestly believe that they honestly believed that they were serving the church by doing what they did. How could they? And my answer to that is that they had a perverse idea of what it is to serve the church because they didn't quite understand what the church is. That they had lost the sense of the supernatural while looking at human respect, at the natural order. In this book, I attack that problem by giving you a primary character who is a priest, a young priest, about whom supernatural claims are made. specifically that he has the gift of healing. It's not a gift he wants. It's not a gift he sought. Other people don't want him to have that gift. How do people adapt to this apparent but unproven burst of what seems the supernatural into the natural order? And in doing so, I'm trying to get at something that I've seen about how do people in the church bureaucracy, and it's a bureaucracy like any other bureaucracy with human failings like any other institution. How do they react when the supernatural seems to impinge upon what they're doing every day, which is more or less comfortable. They're more or less comfortable with what they're doing every day. And it was actually my friend Father Pokorski who wrote that. You knew him as a friend because he wrote that review. I didn't pay him a cent. He pointed out that, priests, and especially people in the chancery, are very uneasy when something happens in the diocese. For instance, something I remember, when Mother Teresa comes into the diocese, she makes people nervous. Why does she make people nervous? Because there's the sense of extraordinary. She might make some extraordinary demands. Who wants an extraordinary demand? I don't. So I try to set a conflict. Here we have this priest who may or may not have the gift of healing. And how do people respond to it? Including, how does he respond to it? And, well, it's not much of a spoiler to say that one of the key scenes in the book involves his blessing a woman who is close to death, and she gets better. And the question is, did he do it? Is it a miracle? Would she have gotten better? Was she really close to death? All of the questions that you would naturally ask. I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts to give you some sense of how poorly I read. This is really not much of a spoiler because you'll figure it out after about a paragraph. Much of the book is written in the form of this young priest's talking to a psychiatrist who he's been asked to consult. And here's the young priest. Let me put it another way. If I hear your confession and you think I'm a very special confessor, that's great, another satisfied customer. But if you think I can heal your body, make some disease go away, then we're getting into a different sort of territory, If Betsy, that's the woman involved, was having some of her half-pious, half-kooky ideas and making me out to be a wonder worker, I don't want to play along. I thought she was kidding herself. That's the main thing. I didn't want to give her any false hopes or any more reason to postpone that visit to Dr. England. I should give you a little background. She's an old lady. She's a very pious lady. You've seen her. She's a church lady. She's a good woman, but very excitable about spiritual things. Always thinks she's having extraordinary experiences. Okay, it's my friend the priest again. Remember now, this is a woman who hasn't been to the doctor for I don't know how many years. I figured that making me out to be a miracle worker was just one more way of avoiding the inevitable, another sign of denial. I told her that. I told her it was wrong, morally wrong, as well as stupid, to ask God to do something you weren't willing to do yourself. Why look for a miracle when you could go to the doctor and maybe get a few pills that would solve the problem? I laid it on heavy, too. By the way, this conversation took place on the sidewalk outside the church, more or less in the open. It was a private conversation, I suppose, just the two of us. But I don't regard it as confidential, and I'm sure she didn't either. Anybody could have come along and heard us. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did, because at this point, I'm pretty sure I was yelling at her. Wait, now that I think about it, I remember that a couple did pass by. They were coming in our direction, going toward the gym. And when they saw me shouting and waving my arms, they took a detour through the parking lot. They didn't want any part of me. So now that I remember that, I guess I did lay it on pretty strong. I shouldn't be beating myself up about that. And I'm also remembering now that Betsy wasn't the least bit frightened. A lot of people are. I mean, obviously I wasn't going to slug her, but I'm a big guy, and when I get mad, usually people back off a bit. I have no doubt that's why that couple stayed clear, not Betsy. I think I overreacted a bit because the whole idea struck me as so ridiculous, you know? I wasn't going to let up until she agreed to see the doctor. I knew that was the right thing to do, and I decided that I wasn't going to talk about this other thing, the special gift, until she promised. I still think that was right, even if I was wrong to get angry. Betsy was getting pretty worked up herself, though. I noticed she was getting out of breath more than usual just from talking. It crossed my mind at the time that maybe she was nervous about talking to me, but no, Betsy never gets nervous about stuff like that. She's very sensitive about other people's problems. She can tell in a minute if somebody looks sick or sad or something. She picks up those cues right away. But she never notices at all when she's making someone else uncomfortable. She just plows straight ahead. So there she was trying to plow through my objections. I'm sure she thought she was on a mission from God and she had to persuade me to acknowledge this special power. Well, finally I got her to stop. I held my ground and said we weren't going to have this conversation until she promised to make a date with the doctor. That worked. She did. She promised. She said she called first thing Monday morning. I was caught a bit off guard. I didn't think she'd back down right away, so now I was in a jam. She'd met my demands, so now I had to make good on my part of the deal. I asked her what specifically she wanted me to do. She said she wanted me to give her a blessing. I almost laughed. I was so relieved. Well, that sets the scene for a few chapters. He's very relieved until, after a few alarms and excursions, he gives her the blessing. And, as I say, spoiler alert, she gets better. And all sorts of factors come into play in the archdiocese where people are anxious, frankly, to discredit him, when he is almost anxious to discredit himself because he does not want to be known as a human priest. And I'm just going to give you a shorter bit of dialogue that occurs when there's a very senior cleric. He is the Chancellor of Boston College, which is a Jesuit institution, not a Catholic school. And he obviously has been put up to interviewing people about this priest, Father Andrew. The priest, as you may have noticed, he's a big guy. He was on the basketball team at Boston College. And the chancellor interviews his old coach. And he's got old coach. He's not quite in the chancery crowd. So they're at lunch, and this is the dialogue with the old coach. The chancellor says to him, "What did you think of that?" Meaning the report of America. The coach, "I took it with a grain of salt, a very big grain of salt. Like I told you, Betsy says that sort of thing a lot. Miracles abound, you know, at least in her world. And she'd been saying for months that Andy has a gift, so in that sense, this was nothing new." "So you're skeptical," says the Jesuit. "Skeptical of Betsy? Definitely. But here's the thing. Betsy was healed. That's a fact. And the doctors can't explain it. That's a fact too. So I'm not going to be skeptical about that. Something happened there. I don't know what happened, but something did. I do believe in miracles, and I suppose if you believe they can happen, you have to be open to the possibility that they'll happen in your neighborhood. Kirby gave another one of those slow, tilted nods, then furrowed his brow again and asked, "What about Andy's role? You're telling me that this is completely out of character for him?" Terry didn't wait for the end of the question. Here's what you've got to understand. Andy isn't saying that he did a miracle. He's doing his level best not to say anything at all. He won't talk about it unless you force him to, and then, even then, he says pretty much nothing. So actually, that's completely in character. He's still trying to stay out of the limelight. But this time, the limelight is staying on him, whether he likes it or not, which is why we're here today, I guess. There's sort of bookends of the theme of this novel. The skepticism, the unwillingness to accept, coming from sort of all sides. And as I put it in one other place, the only person in this novel who is happy with what happened is Betsy, the church lady, because she's cured, she feels better, and she loves saying that this priest has a special gift, which he hates to hear. So that's the tension of the novel. I won't tell you how it's resolved, because I've already given away much too much for a suspense thriller. Last piece I want to talk about, how did it get written? And I mean this as a little bit of the practical side of this talk, because maybe there's somebody out there who wants to write a novel. I hope so. And it's, as I said, it's not easy to get novels in print these days. People don't read novels enough. People don't write novels enough. And you know, if you want great novels, you have to have good novels. You gotta take baby steps before you get along. So how did I write it? Well, here's the bad news if you're thinking about writing a novel. I began writing this novel almost exactly 40 years ago. I can tell you where I wrote the first paragraph on a K-Pro 2 computer. I don't know if anybody remembers the K-Pro 2. I loved it.
I remember it.
Yeah, you did love it. And was it 4 homes ago at this point? And several jobs ago, and many years ago? I'm tempted to say that I had hair then. That's not true. So you see why I say it's not all that likely that I will have a second novel, because if I take 40 years, the actuarial tables are working against me. But maybe not, because ideas are addictive. So why did it take me 40 years? Because I started writing it. I had an idea. I started writing. I got through maybe 4 or 5 chapters, and I said, this just isn't working. And I set it aside. But I set it aside on a floppy disk in the K-Pro 2. So when I got my next computer, I transferred that, and I tried again after a few years. And I got maybe 1 or 2 chapters this time, and it wasn't working. And I think it was the 4th try, a couple of years ago, I said to myself, this is going to either happen now or it's never going to happen. And it came. The novel that came was essentially the same. The plot was essentially the same. It's changed a lot over the years, as you can imagine. It came. I like novels. I read a lot of novels. And part of the reason I wanted to write a novel is because I'm a great believer that you shouldn't just consume, you should produce. just listen to music. You should play an instrument or sing. You shouldn't just watch a ball game. You should play ball. You shouldn't just read novels. You should write them. Or you should write poetry, and I've tried that. I have written one poem. It came to me. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how it happened. I kind of like it. Other people kind of liked it, but this book began as a thriller. It began as a suspense thriller. It morphed into what it is now. And it went through multiple drafts. That's another unique thing about this book. Every other book that I've written, if you have read it, which you probably haven't, you've read the first draft. I don't do multiple drafts. I do a lot of thinking, a lot of outlining, but by the time I sit down to write, I'm ready to roll. Not so with this. Multiple drafts, even when, a couple of years ago, I set out and did the whole thing. Then I did it again. Then I did it again. Then I submitted it to comments, to friends who gave me comments. And the comments were helpful, and I did it again, sort of thing. And after some of you here know my daughter Bridget, who is, I'm sure, going to be the famous novelist in our family, who has a degree in creative writing. And she was actually instrumental more than any other critic in telling me what I've been doing wrong. She said, stop being a journalist. You're describing the action. You have to let the characters play it out and let us watch. And that was very helpful. Now, when I dip into it, I still see I didn't do it as well as Dostoevsky. For that, I apologize. But I think I've done, I reached a point where I said, could this be better? Yes. Could I make it better? I don't think so. I think this is the best I can do. And so I was looking for a way to get it. I said, now I've done all this, I might as well see if I can get it out there. And I was looking for a way to do that, and realizing the world was not really waiting for a novel by Phil Lawler. The world is so ignorant. And I asked my friend Charlie McKinney from Sophia Institute Press for advice. I had earlier asked him, just innocently asking for a friend. I said, do you ever print fiction? And he said, no, it can't sell. I said, okay, well, take that to the bank, or rather, you can't take it to the bank. But when I told him, honestly, I said, I have this book, I'm thinking I'd probably self-publish it. Can you give me any advice? Because I don't know how to market, I don't know how to get it printed. And he said, oh, well, we have this new press that we can do short print runs. Maybe I can make a deal with you. And I said, well, let's sit down and talk. And we sat down and talked, and we were very close to making a deal. And then he said, well, why don't you send me the manuscript and I'll take a look at it. Partly to see if it's something that they don't want to have anything to do with. And maybe because he's a good guy, partly so he could say, Phil, don't give up your day job. But to my delighted surprise, he said, we're going to print this. So he printed a very short print run. And I have to say, I'm going to be a realist here. I think he did it partly as a favor because we're friends, and partly as a favor because my wife Lila is one of his best sellers, and he wants to make sure that he is in high regard at the moment. But I think it's worked out because they have just about sold out the first print run, and I'm of course delighted with that. Because, as I say, it hasn't even started selling on Amazon. Amazon just dominates book selling. So a lot of people, it's kind of a secret that it's out there. It's word of mouth at this point. So I guess somebody out there likes it, and I'm delighted by that. You don't have to. I do want to say that it shows it is possible to get a Catholic novel published. You have to have some things going for you, as I did. Not talent, you know, some things other than talent, but it can be done. So, as I say, I know it's not a great novel. I hope it's a good novel. I hope some of you will read it and like it. I hope if you don't like it, you'll tell me why, so that if I do a sequel, it will be better. And if I shouldn't do a sequel, I won't. Either way, you're helping. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Gluttons for punishment. Yes?
So, if I understood you correctly, you wanted to write a novel as a different way to get people thinking about certain things?
Yes.
Do you think that is a common goal of novelists?
I don't think so. You know, you hear, for instance, Uncle Tom's Cabin was a major factor in, you know, the Civil War. I almost said World War I. It happens. I don't think it's typical, no. I think that good novelists want to tell a story. I remember Saul Bellow in his Nobel Prize lecture after he won, saying that that's what the world wants. They want a story. And I wanted to tell a story. And I think that may be the difference between the novel that I began in 1986 and the novel that came out a few weeks ago, is that over time it was less urgent to me to do what I had set out to do, and it was more, I wanted to tell a story, because I started to like the characters. They weren't stick figures. I started to have feelings about what was appropriate for this character, and sometimes I didn't know why, but it just seemed like, oh, that's not something he would say. Something that really made me think about the nature of literary inspiration is that from the very beginning, I had pictured my main character, Father Andy Moore, as very tall. And I don't know why. And eventually I put him on a basketball team, but that's incidental. And late in the novel, and around the fourth or fifth draft, I realized that there's a point where it comes in really very handy that he's a big guy. I said, was that there somehow up here all along? But there it was. I don't know, you'd have to ask other novelists.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, the comment that you made earlier about theology, that there is a kind of theology, or can you remind me? That sparked my curiosity. So obviously, as you said, it takes place in the Archdiocese of Boston in the 80s. There's a priest, so there's Catholicity all around it.
Yeah.
How would you distinguish perhaps that idea of Catholicity all around it, if that's fitting, from theology in it, or not in it, as you said?
Well, just that I'm not intentionally getting into debates about any theological subjects, but there's a theological angle to it in that, well, it comes out a little bit. Do you or do you not believe that it's possible for someone to have the gift of healing, for an extraordinary thing like that to happen? And then also it comes out more or less how do you respond to that? Are you more emphatically oriented towards the business of the church as a business, you know, that, and this is bad for business, making these extraordinary claims. You're upsetting people.
So more the contrast between faith and theology, more question of faith rather than theological.
Right, yeah,
investigation.
I'm not making any arguments here. I guess I realize something that I haven't said is there is in the background of this book, not hidden in the background, it's a subplot, but very evident, that this priest, who may or may not have the gift of healing, he's a problem, right? And so people, and this is something I've seen, that church leaders see a problem. Now, what's the problem? Somebody got healed. Now, where's the problem? But it's not in our control, and we're nervous about that. Okay, the subplot is there is another priest who is having difficulties of a sort with which we have become all too familiar. And how are the authorities handling that problem in contrast with this benign problem? That's there. It is not a book about the scandals, but they're in the back. This is in the 80s, right? So the scandals hadn't burst yet, but they were there. And the people in the know knew. Yes?
So going back to Father Kokorski's review, one of the things that struck me is he compares it first to Wise Blood, so another novel, but then he makes comparisons to The Godfather, Psycho,
Chancery.
and Ghostbusters, all of which are movies.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me a lot of novels that are published today are already eyeing that screenplay so that they're going to be made for movies.
So you want the part.
No, who's going to play the tall priest? But did you ever have a conception, because our culture is so, film saturated, and I don't know how your imagination works. Are you visualizing these characters in action? Are you, if someone approached you tomorrow, Phil, I wanted to buy your novel and write the screenplay and launch you on your career as a screenplay writer, is that, I mean?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
Okay,
not.
okay.
Because I have almost, my visual imagination is like this.
Yeah.
And, you can describe to me someplace that you've been, and you can describe it beautifully, and it's just, nothing's going on. Now, I have in my head an imagination of what the room looks like this conversation is taking place in, but I can't imagine putting that down on paper. In the unlikely event that somebody wants to make a movie on this, I think I would be guided by the example of my late friend Ralph McInerney, who wrote the Father Dowling mysteries, and then he sold them to television. And he signed a piece of paper, and they gave him a big check, and he said, goodbye. He has no interest in the Father Dowling on TV.
I wouldn't let you do that. That was a huge mistake.
No, I would not.
Those are so dumb.
No, they are, and I would not do that, but I mean, I would want some veto power, but it's not. I can't imagine that I would do it. You've now frightened me thoroughly.
I'm really sorry. I just had to, now I'm gonna ask a literary question. So you kind of alluded to this. This is, I think you're being a little modest in saying, I'm writing this, when clearly it's been something that's, I don't know if I would use the word nagging, but given up for decades.
Yeah.
And I'm often shocked when, maybe not shocked, but surprised to hear writers talk about their fiction, and especially characterization. So in a way that the characters, they live with them for so long that they kind of take on their own lives. And so when you're writing the story, there's a way in which you're not dictating their actions anymore, and you kind of got to that. It sounds like.
Yeah.
So that, were you surprised at points? Because you talk about this, I'm writing with an intention to give a message and draw certain things, but at the same time, it seems like there's a certain element of it that is, not that you're not in control, but that you've created this fictional world so well that the characters do.
Well, I don't know how well I've created it, but yes. For sure, the difference between when I started and when I finished, a lot of the reason that I stalled out is because I came to a point where in my conception of the work, one of the characters had to do something, which that character just couldn't do. That was just wrong for that character. And I had to figure out why it was wrong or work around it some way or another, because you have to be true to the character. And I found now, after having finished, and I was quite sure when I finished that this was my first and last novel. And now several people have asked me, would you do a sequel? And I've said, because I now know a couple of these characters, and I know what's likely to happen to them. So, I don't have 40 years. I don't think. But, who knows? Yes.
I'm interested in what I would maybe call like the nudging. Would you call it that? The nudging of the Holy Ghost? Could it be that? If you said your book is a good book and everything good and true and beautiful is of God or is inspired by God, and you had this idea and it nudged you, and then over time maybe you kind of hit a wall with it or whatever, but if someone has an idea and they get nudged a little bit, it's possible that that's the Holy Ghost saying this is an idea that only you can do. And then the repeat nudge, maybe sometime later and sometime later, especially if they didn't act on it, right? And then, over time. Can you speak to that? I'm interested in that idea.
I completely agree. I mean, if it's not a bad thing to do, then it's probably a good thing to do. I hope it's a good thing to do, I mean, I don't play golf, so, and I do think it was nudging. It was something that I felt I shouldn't do. And I hope I can't imagine it's diabolical, so I hope it's the work of the Holy Spirit nudging me, and I do think that it's also probably the work of the Holy Spirit sparing the world from what might have been the earlier efforts. Yes.
Just to follow up on that idea, and what you said at the beginning, can you speak a little bit to, I think it's actually germane to Thomas More College and the mission of the college, the idea of, like, one of the mothers of our, the class, a classmate of our daughter said about Thomas More College that she felt, having known other colleges in the same class, that here there's more of an idea of coming to the point where you can express the good and not just allow the good to remain in your mind. Like this thought of, we see the good, we think of the good, but it's going to stay in our minds, versus we are now going to try to form the students to do something with it. And to this idea of the Holy Spirit nudging you, because it's not easy
to nudge me, you should know.
It's not easy for anyone to do something creative. I mean, it's, you know, it's not easy for a woman to give birth to a child. It's not easy for an artist to create a work. So you do need nudging, but can you just speak a little more to that of like the transition maybe from having all these ideas in your mind and thinking it's good to be creative, we need more Catholic artists
Yeah.
in the culture.
Well, I think I'd say two things about that. First, expressing. So that it's not all just in your mind. That part, I think, is easy to understand. I think also expressing it in a different way. Not in a term paper, you know, not in a Euclidean proof, but in a different way so that it comes at people from the side as you're reading up. No, how often have you convinced somebody in an argument? You know, it doesn't happen that much. But lots of people are moved by novels, by fiction, by stories. So that's part of it. And the other part is the creative part. Yes, it is work giving birth to a novel. And every writer I know has a different way of working. And as I said earlier, most of the work I've done, and still most of the work I'm doing now, I think about it. By the time I sit down and start typing, that's the part I love. It's getting there, that's the hard part. But I know people for whom it's exactly the opposite. Remember Michael Novak saying, who is a prolific writer, saying he hated writing. He hated the actual typing. And I'm just the opposite. But it is interesting that this was more work for me, actually getting it written. I don't know what that means. It means maybe a little bit like, you know, you hear people who can play music by ear but can't read music, and vice versa. And maybe it's something like that going on. I don't know. I haven't thought about it before. I have to think about that before I write anything. I exhausted all curiosity. Thank you so much.